Snowflakes drifted softly against the window as Michael adjusted the tiny string of lights around his modest living room. It was Christmas Eve, and though money was tight, the single dad was determined to make the night magical for his 7-year-old son, Ethan. Their little apartment wasn't much: second-hand furniture, a tree they'd rescued from the clearance section, and homemade ornaments, but Michael's heart swelled with pride knowing his boy would wake to a warm, loving home. After losing his wife to illness years earlier, he had promised himself Ethan would never feel alone. He'd worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sacrificed his own comforts just to keep that promise. Tonight, with the glow of the lights bouncing off Ethan's sleepy smile, Michael felt a rare peace. But as he stepped outside to take the trash to the dumpster, he noticed something that shattered the fragile joy he had worked so hard to build. Just a few feet away, a small figure was bent over the garbage bins, her hands trembling in the cold as she dug through discarded boxes and scraps. Michael froze, his breath catching in his throat. A little girl, no older than Ethan, was searching the trash on Christmas Eve. Her coat was too thin, her hair tangled, and her face pale with hunger. For a moment, Michael's world went silent, his heart pounding louder than the winter wind. He couldn't look away. Something inside told him this wasn't just a passing sight, it was a moment that would change his life forever. Michael hesitated, his hand still clutching the trash bag, torn between shock and compassion. He glanced back at his apartment window where Ethan's shadow danced near the tree, then back to the little girl rummaging through scraps like survival depended on it. "Hey, sweetheart," he called gently, afraid to startle her. She froze, clutching a half-crushed box of crackers as if it were treasure. Her wide eyes, glistening with both fear and shame, met his. I'm sorry," she whispered, dropping the box and backing away. The raw vulnerability in her voice pierced Michael's chest. He stepped forward slowly, crouching down so his tall frame wouldn't frighten her. "No need to be sorry. Are you hungry?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, her lips trembling. He could see the way her tiny fingers were red from the cold, how her shoes were so worn that snow seeped in through the holes. Michael's thoughts swirled: how could a child be out here alone on Christmas Eve? Where were her parents? He looked around, expecting someone to appear, but the alley was silent except for the whistle of the winter wind. Compassion surged inside him stronger than hesitation. He extended his hand. "Come on. Let's get you warm. I've got hot chocolate inside." The girl's eyes widened, torn between distrust and desperate hope. Finally, she inched closer, gripping his hand with surprising strength. Michael felt a chill, not from the weather, but from the unspoken truth in her touch. Whatever her story was, it was heavier than any child should ever have to carry. Inside the small apartment, the warmth of the heater and the faint smell of cinnamon filled the air. Ethan looked up from where he had been setting cookies on a plate, his eyes widening when he saw the little girl standing shyly behind his dad. "Daddy, who's she?" he asked softly. Michael gave a reassuring smile. "This is our guest for tonight," he said, hanging up her thin coat. The girl's cheeks flushed as she stared at the glowing tree, her eyes reflecting the twinkling lights like she had stumbled into another world. Ethan, in his innocent way, grabbed one of the sugar cookies and offered it to her without hesitation. "You can have mine," he said. Her small hands shook as she accepted, and tears welled in her eyes at the simple kindness. Michael quickly poured her a mug of hot chocolate, watching closely as she wrapped her fingers around it as though it was the first real warmth she'd felt in days. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. After a long pause, she whispered, "Lily." The name carried a fragility that made Michael's heart ache. He wanted to ask more, where she lived, why she was alone, but he saw the way her face tightened whenever he edged near the subject. Instead, he let silence cradle her as she ate, offering only gentle smiles. For a moment, the room felt whole, like three pieces of a puzzle that somehow belonged together. And yet, Michael couldn't ignore the gnawing thought in the back of his mind: what kind of truth would make a child this young dig through trash on Christmas Eve? After Lily finished the cookie, she sat quietly on the couch, her eyes drifting between the ornaments and Ethan's eager chatter. Michael sat across from her, studying the way she kept tugging at her sleeves as if trying to disappear. Finally, with a voice barely louder than the hum of the heater, she whispered, "My mom, she said she'd be right back. But she never came." The words hung heavy in the air, cutting Michael deeper than he expected. Ethan's smile faded, his young mind struggling to grasp the weight of what he'd just heard. Michael leaned forward, his throat tightening. "How long ago was that?" he asked gently. Lily shrugged, her eyes fixed on the floor. 2 days. Maybe 3. I slept outside. I was just looking for food. Michael felt a storm rise inside him, anger, sorrow, and disbelief, yet he knew he couldn't let any of it show. This wasn't the time for judgment, it was the time for love. He reached out, resting a steady hand over hers. "You don't have to look anymore," he said firmly. "You're safe here." Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent but relentless. Ethan moved closer, wrapping his little arms around her in an innocent embrace that carried more power than words ever could. Michael watched them, a lump forming in his throat. He had always thought his life was about making Christmas magical for his son, but in that moment, he realized something greater. Sometimes, the magic wasn't in gifts or lights, it was in being found when you thought you were forgotten. The night grew quieter as the hours slipped by. Ethan eventually fell asleep on the couch, his head resting against Lily's shoulder, as though they had been siblings all their lives. Michael watched them, torn between exhaustion and an overwhelming sense of purpose. He quietly draped a blanket over the children, then sat in the dim glow of the tree, wrestling with the questions that refused to leave his mind. What if Lily's mother never came back? What if this little girl had nowhere else to go? His own struggles as a single dad had often left him feeling stretched thin, but looking at her now, he realized that sometimes the people with the least still had the most to give. His heart reminded him of the promises he had made when Ethan was born, that he would never turn away from doing what was right. He knew then what he had to do. The next morning, instead of just calling social services and handing Lily off to strangers, Michael vowed to fight for her, to make sure she was cared for and loved. He didn't know exactly how, but he knew family wasn't always about blood, it was about showing up when no one else would. As he tucked the blanket more securely around Lily, he whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Somehow, on the very night he thought his life was small and stretched to the limit, he had been given a chance to expand his heart in ways he never imagined. Morning light filtered through the curtains, spilling across the room like a quiet promise. Lily stirred awake, blinking as if unsure whether the warmth around her was real. Ethan greeted her with a sleepy grin and handed her one of the small presents he had wrapped with his dad the night before. "This one's for you," he said proudly. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief. She clutched the simple gift, just a scarf Michael had bought at the dollar store, as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever received. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't born of loneliness, they were tears of being seen, of belonging. Michael knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You're not alone anymore, Lily. We'll figure this out together." She nodded, unable to speak, but the way she leaned into his embrace said everything. For the first time in days, maybe in years, she felt safe. And for Michael, who had thought his Christmas was already full with just keeping his son's heart intact, he realized it had grown beyond anything he could have planned. The truth that stunned him wasn't just Lily's heartbreaking story, it was the discovery that his capacity to love, to protect, to give, was far greater than he had ever imagined. That Christmas morning, in a modest apartment with second-hand furniture and a clearance tree, 3 souls found what countless gifts could never provide: hope, family, and the reminder that sometimes the most unexpected guests are the very miracles we've been waiting for.